January 26th. It's probably the most divisive day on the Australian calendar. Some people say that we need to get over all this Invasion Day stuff, crack a few drinks, enjoy the sun, and celebrate Australia Day like we used to. But the truth is, Invasion Day and Invasion Day protests are as old as Australia Day itself. January 26, 1788, the First Fleet arrived and British naval officer Arthur Phillip hoists up the Union Jack at Sydney Cove, establishing the first prison colony and essentially marking the beginning of European invasion of the continent. For the indigenous people of the land who had been here for thousands of years before, it did indeed mark invasion and the beginning of massacres, land dispossession, a loss of culture, language, and eventually racist and unjust government policies that would see the forced removals of thousands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families, which only ended a few decades ago in the 1970s. Jump ahead 127 years and we have our first Australia Day, or should I say 127 years and 7 months, because it was held on July 30th and was simply a fundraiser for World War I soldiers. Back then, only New South Wales marked the anniversary of the First Fleet at all, calling January 26 Anniversary Day. It wasn't until 1935 that all states started recognising it as Australia Day, and just 3 years later, the history of First Nations people protesting the day began. 1788. On January 26, 1938, to celebrate 150 years since the landing of the First Fleet, the New South Wales government planned a reenactment. However, after Aboriginal people in Sydney refused to take part, the organisers took men from a Western New South Wales reserve, locked them in the Sydney police stables overnight, and forced them to run up the beach pretending to flee in fear of the British colonists. At the same time, a group of Aboriginal men and women gathered at Australia Hall in Sydney, officially holding the first ever day of mourning. When they came together, they moved a resolution declaring they were protesting the treatment of Indigenous people by the white men and calling for policies that would bring about equality. This equality is what First Nations people have been fighting for since the First Fleet arrived all those years ago, and these protests continued every year, morphing from the Day of Mourning to Survival Day in the 80s to the modern Invasion Day demonstrations and marches you now know.
That was declared on our people over 200 years ago!
These protests across the country are done to bring awareness to the ongoing injustices Indigenous people continue to face, asserting that Australia Day doesn't actually represent all Australians and ignores the ongoing impacts of colonisation. And ever since that first conference at Australia Hall, these protests have included calls to change the date to one that is inclusive of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
It's a day that we remember the genocide of our people.
I'm not saying it's wrong to celebrate the day. People should feel free to do as they please in this country. But let's not pretend that protests, resistance, and the acknowledgement of Australia's painful history is something new. Invasion Day has always been a part of January 26. It's just as Aussie as Australia Day.